are here. Thank you so much for being here. This is a free webinar that we are providing to the community, and we are very grateful to have had the opportunity to be able to host this for through the webinar, right? Like, we are practicing social distancing, and at the same time, we want to be able to make this information and accessible to the community to provide support. So we invite you to share the link to other friends and family members, and this is going to be really an opportunity for us to get information as to maybe some of the stuff that we're going through. How does COVID-19 impact our mental health and the adjustments that we've had to do? And then also we're going to talk about some resiliency factors as well. So we're gonna introduce your host. So we have Crystal Martinez. She's a licensed professional counselor and board-approved supervisor in the state of Texas, and a nationally certified counselor through the National Board of Certified Counselors. She graduated with honors from UTEP with a BA in psychology and sociology. She then earned her MA in counseling and guidance with a 4.0 GPA and award for outstanding graduate student from NMSU. She has experience working with individuals and families who have been affected by traumatic events. She is certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and is the region's only level 1 trainer in parent-child interaction therapy. She's also trained in EMDR, motivational interviewing, multi-systems therapy, and trust-based relational intervention. So we are very grateful to have her here presenting for the community. We also have Guillermo Castañeda. He is a mental health counselor and a hypnotherapist and the director of counseling of El Paso. He completed his master's in education in mental health counseling at the University of Texas at El Paso and is certified in hypnotherapy by the Hypnosis Motivational Institute. His clinical approach is eclectic, as he believes that one size doesn't fit all. His training and modalities range from cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, and hypnotherapy. He is passionate about helping others and connect with their inner self and have strong and healthy relationships. So with no further ado, we warmly welcome Guillermo and Crystal as they present this free webinar to the community. So welcome.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine.
So in this presentation, what you'll learn is how a pandemic can cause collective trauma and individual trauma responses, how the world and our lifestyle has changed and how it relates to grief. You'll learn how people can have different reactions to the pandemic, how the brain, body, and mind react to stress, and what to watch out for, ways to support yourself and your loved ones through this time, and about hope and resiliency.
Great. So, we have typical responses during the crisis. This is very normal, what we're going through with COVID-19. We're having a crisis, and we have different phases. One of them is the pre-disaster phase, which is what happened before we actually went through the mode where we were communicated more information. We heard from the news, we heard from social media. Phase 2, we have the impact phase. So in this, we have a range of intense emotional reactions, kind of like the pre-disaster phase. We also have fears. We also have a sense of loss. We know that this can actually create a sense of shock and even panic. In this stage, we have confusion. We have a disbelief of what's going on. In this way, we don't know who to believe. Do we believe what we're hearing from media? Do we believe what's going on from the social media? Do we believe what's going on from news? Am I supposed to stay inside? Am I supposed to go out? Is that okay? Is it okay if I hang around my family? So we don't know what's going to happen. And in this stage, after this confusion, we actually fall into self-preservation, and we try to also protect our family. Then we have phase three, and this is what's called the heroic phase. And this is where we see a lot of activity, but we don't see a lot of productivity. Right here, we notice that community members are actually, they have adrenaline in their bodies and they're moving and they're behaving in ways that can rescue others. This is what happened in during our community, where it was kind of like, how can I help you? How can I help other people? And we go to a honeymoon phase, which is characterized by a shift in our emotion that is very dramatic. In this phase, um, we have disaster assistance. This is where the government came in and they let us know you're supposed to stay home. You're supposed to uh, social distance from other people. Wear the face masks. A lot of these things are going on in this honeymoon phase. We have a lot of optimism. And we noticed that was happening in the news. This is going to be over like right away, maybe 2 weeks. And so we had a lot of optimism and a lot of those opportunities as well to establish and build rapport with those people that are affected. Um, Also, the businesses, they're coming out and they're telling people like, well, you have resources. In others, you have unemployment. You can have a check. You can have a lot of other things. So this is what's happening in the honeymoon phase. And then we also have a phase that's called disillusionment. So this is where we're told, you know what, it's not going to last 2 weeks. It's not going to last a month. We start to notice that even though we did the right things, the social distance, even though we did the right things of staying at home, it didn't resolve situations as fast as we thought. And so there's this kind of disillusionment. It doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that it's not working as fast. And so this can actually last for months or even years because we notice that we have been affected. It may be economically, maybe and we'll talk about that in the future. We'll talk about that in another slide, but maybe we're affected with anxiety or situations within the family that we need to resolve. So this is actually a phase that we're going to be falling through. And then we have phase three, which is the reconstruction, and which shows that feeling of recovery. This is where we are actually taking responsibility and of rebuilding our lives. This is where we're adjusting to what's the new normal, which where we grieve the losses. This is where we understand, okay, those things that I lived through that changed me, I'm just going to have to deal with that, but I'm going to have to grow from it. And so this reconstruction phase actually lasts for years. Um, just to give you an idea of how this actually works, and this will work, let's talk about, for example, 9/11, when we were in a shock at the very beginning of what was happening, what we were looking at on TV. Then the heroic phase where we actually jumped and we said, what can we do? How can we work this out? The honeymoon of optimism of, yes, we're all standing together. We're all patriots. And then we start to notice the disillusionment where we had losses and we started to notice that. And some people had depression, some people had anxiety, but through the years, we actually recovered. So it doesn't mean that this is going to last for a long time, the recovery, but it may, and we just need to be aware of that.
So we're going to start talking about trauma. This is another thing that you'll learn about in this webinar and that we'll talk about a lot. So trauma, very simply put down here on the bottom, is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And trauma is subjective. Trauma is defined by the person who's experiencing it. So a good example that I like to give my patients and clients is like if I stub my toe and my client were to stub my toe or you were to stub your toe. For me, that might be a very traumatic experience. And for you, it might be like, oh, I just stubbed my toe. I'm fine. It hurt for a little while, but I'm okay. So it just depends on the person that's experiencing the traumatic event. And there are different kinds of trauma. So the next thing that we're going to cover is collective trauma. So okay, so collective trauma is a trauma that happens to large-scale groups of individuals and can be transmitted transgenerationally and across communities. So this is an example, this pandemic that we're experiencing right now is an example of collective trauma. This is something that is happening worldwide, and the effects of the many losses that we're experiencing are things that many of us are experiencing today. So um, it's important to understand that this is a collective trauma.
We noticed that while witnessing this pandemic, we can also go through what's called a secondary trauma, which is where we hear from other people's experiences, from firsthand experiences of when people were affected. Um, or maybe we heard it from the social media. Maybe we actually know somebody that was affected. And so this can cause what's called a secondary trauma because we didn't actually live through it, but we just, it impacts us just as well. Vicarious trauma is when we have been working with the survivors. This is for the professionals, mental health professionals, or maybe doctors, um, nurses, people that have actually been working with the survivors, and they can also be traumatized. So there is a risk of when we talk about secondary and vicarious trauma. So people that have been in traumatic experiences before, they've had these previous traumatic experiences, they can be affected more than other people. Also, people that are isolating themselves socially, or people that have a tendency to avoid feelings or withdraw, and also some people that have difficulty expressing those feelings. Um, some people that they haven't been preparing themselves to through the situations. Also, people that have been in a constant and intense exposure to trauma. So it doesn't matter, if it has to do with the COVID, but they just have this exposure to trauma. Um, and then we go through grief, which it's a sense of loss. So what did we lose? Um, we don't need to lose family members. We don't need to lose um, uh, our health. But think about while we're staying in our home, what are we losing? We're losing our freedoms. We're losing the social one face-to-face interactions. We're losing the ways to actually go through routines, um, a job uh, for some people, their employment. So there is some loss, and we're going to have to go through that grief.
Yes, and just like you were saying, Memo, that it doesn't necessarily mean that we've maybe lost somebody. There are people, many people who have died from COVID-19 or complications. And so there is that sense of grief in loss and in death, but there are ways that other people have lost other things, like you said, jobs, ways of life, certain lifestyles, being able to leave the house, social interactions. And so here what you see on your screen are the 7 stages of grief. And I'll quickly go through them. The first one is shock and denial. And so this is where you might experience hearing about COVID-19 or hearing about somebody who has died because of this disease, and then kind of reacting with shock or reacting with something like, I don't believe this is happening, this can't be happening, just kind of being in denial. And it also makes me wonder about people who kind of don't follow like the stay-at-home order, and how they could potentially be in a stage of denial where they're like, this isn't really going to affect me, or this isn't happening in our community. And so it could be potentially that they're experiencing one of the stages of grief. Then we go through pain and guilt. Obviously, feeling uh, like everything is chaotic and feeling uncertainty. And then we also have anger and bargaining. And so this is where you might ask, why me? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us as a society? What did we do wrong? If only we could go back and maybe go to church more or pray more, or hang out with our family more, all of this would go away. Or maybe I should have practiced more hygiene, or if I wouldn't have walked into that hospital, then I wouldn't have gotten sick. So you're going back and forth in bargaining. Then there's also depression. Um, and I lost the PowerPoint there, but
Yeah,
depression is
thank
a
you.
deep sadness, um, not experiencing really any joy, or feeling guilt because you don't feel, or that you feel joy and others are um, suffering. So having a sense of sadness and depression, and this is the most, I guess, thought of or common reaction when we think of grief, is that people get sad. And that's fine. You might experience sadness because of everything that we've had to change, or if you've lost a loved one, then that's something that you might experience. Then there's also the upward turn. So if you start to feel maybe a little bit better, a little bit more hopeful, like, okay, maybe I can deal with this. Our world is a little bit different now, and maybe starting to gain some optimism. That's kind of the upward turn. And then there's finally acceptance and integration. And this is where you are okay with what Memo called earlier the new normal, and being able to go through grief. So if you look at the stages of grief, notice that these arrows on the screen are not in a line. They are up, down, backwards, forwards, all over the page, because that's a normal way to go through grief. You can skip through some phases, you can go backwards to some phases. It's not necessarily a process that goes straight from shock and denial all the way to reconstruction and acceptance and hope. You can go backwards and forwards, and grief is different for everybody. And a lot of people like to compare grief to the ocean or waves. So grief will come in waves. You might feel sad or really overwhelmed some days, and then on other days you have good days. So that's kind of a summary of grief, and why we wanted to cover this in the mental health for COVID-19 presentation is because a lot of us are experiencing grief through this time, and it's totally normal. Even therapists like us are
Hmm.
experiencing grief. So it's important to understand that this is a normal part of the process. And we'll talk a little bit later about once grief crosses a certain line into depression and to some other symptoms, and what to watch out for. But for now, this is what I wanted to cover for grief.
It's important to understand that through this process, through the situation that we're going through, this event that we're going through, that we need to have our needs met when we're living through a distressing and traumatic experience. So, what you're seeing on your screen is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a model that shows our needs that we need to take care of first, going from the bottom up. So, physiological needs are the most basic needs for survival. They're air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Need that we have is the safety. So this is where a lot of people are having some problems because we're talking about, uh, for example, employment. A lot of people notice that they're actually not able to go to work. This is where the stay at home is affecting us a lot because um, we're either unable to go to work, or we have been let go from our jobs. Um, so one of the safety needs is not met in this place. Um, One of the things that the government, for example, is trying to do is they're trying to give people unemployment, or the businesses, they're trying to help them give the people pay. So this goes into resources. So there are resources out there, and we can actually, even though we wouldn't have the ideal employment space or the money coming in from the employment, we can dig from other resources. Our health is very important in this place. It's also good to know that we also have security, that we're going to be able to uh, keep distance from other people and be at our house and not allow other people inside our house that don't live there. So this is a good way to actually have that safety need met. Our property, we know that we're not losing our homes. So for some people, it's about talking to the mortgage company and saying, "Can you hang on for a while?" And mortgage companies are actually working with people on this. They're allowing people to pay later, and so this is a way to have those safety needs met. Um, Love and belonging. When we talk about love and belonging, we talk about friendship, we talk about intimacy, we talk about family, we talk about sense of connection. So in here, we can actually say, how are we getting those needs met? This is a really good opportunity to get closer to our partners, to get closer to our family. And we'll touch upon on another slide, but what is it that we can do to what is it that we can do while I cannot go out and I cannot speak to my friends or my family? How can I get connected to them? So this is important. It's important for us to also have love and belonging. So remember, we need the physiological needs first, then the safety, then the love and belonging, and now we're looking at the esteem. So how can I work with my self-esteem? How can I work to get the recognition that I need, the respect that I need? Or the how can I feel strong through this situation, even though um, I'm not stepping out of my home? What can I do to get that sense of freedom? And then we have the self actualization, which is a desire to become the best that we can be. This phase is actually unable to be met until the other four are met, and we'll talk about later on um some things that we can actually do, but it's really important to get the other four phases met.
Yeah, I think the important thing to understand about this hierarchy is that during a crisis or during a traumatic event, it's almost impossible to function at the first two that you see on the screen, the blue and the green, and even the yellow. So we're not going to be worried so much about friends and if I'm being appreciated at my job and if I'm being the best person and individual that I can be. When we're in crisis, really, and there's a disaster going on, we're really concerned, and it pushes us all the way down to meeting our physiological needs and our safety needs. So it's important to understand that um, if you're, for example, an employee of a company and you're working from home, it might be hard to focus when you're working because you're not really able to focus on esteem or self-actualization at the top of the triangle. You're really worried about, am I going to get sick? Do we have enough toilet paper? Or can I go to the grocery store to go get milk for my kids? So you're going to be worrying about things that are at the bottom of this hierarchy whenever there's a crisis going on. I think that's an important thing to understand about yourself in a crisis and to understand about others in a crisis as well. So here we talk about the actual physiology of the brain. during a crisis or a traumatic event. So if you're looking at the screen, what you'll see is three different colors, and the red part represents the crisis or the survival brain, also known as the reptile brain or the lizard brain, because even lizards have this part of the brain. And if we think about reptiles, and the way they function, they're really just made to survive, right? So we as humans also have this part of our brain. And whenever there's a crisis, this survival brain goes into full gear for most of us, right? We also have, as humans, the green part of the brain, which is like the neocortex and the frontal lobe. And that would be like kind of where your forehead is. And that's where you're able to do math and planning and reading and processing and critical thinking. And what's interesting about the brain during a crisis is that um, you can't really have the red part and the green part working together at the same time. It's really either or. So why is this important? Because again, when we go back to talking about working at home or having children that are attending school at home during a crisis, really what's happening is that we're seeing images and getting messages of a crisis and COVID-19 and seeing people in masks and people hospitalized and images of mass graves and a stay-at-home order and talk about martial law and parents stressing out about finances and grocery store visits and taking care of our elderly parents. So all of that is really being processed in the crisis brain. And so it's difficult to engage the front brain whenever there's a crisis going on. So it's important to understand systemically what we were talking about earlier, responses to a crisis, as groups of people feeling it worldwide, but also individually we have these parts of our brain, and that's just how we've evolved over time. Everybody has these specific parts of the brain, and whenever there's a stressful or traumatic experience, I can guarantee you that if you're a human being, your reptile brain's going to turn on. And so it's important to understand that there's a physiological component. And crisis and survival brain, whenever it's activated, can look like anxiety. It can look like your heart beating really fast. It can look like you suddenly don't have the ability to concentrate. You kind of I guess, like stare off into space, or maybe you fight, you flight, or you freeze. So that's a fight, flight, freeze response, right? And that part of the brain is responsible for that. So think about yourself and how you react during a crisis, how you react under stress, and really some of the ways to calm down the reptile brain or the crisis brain are things that we're going to cover later in another slide, but really being able to engage your other systems in your body by deep breathing, relaxing, doing things that will slow you down, things that will ground you, arts and crafts, laughing with your kids, doing deep breathing, taking a bubble bath. All those things will turn off the reptile brain, and you're able then to re-engage your frontal lobe and your thinking brain.
So these are the common reactions that we go through whenever we go through a situation that's so stressful. So ranging from nervousness, from feeling on the edge, people having trouble sleeping, people living in fear, feeling overwhelmed, stressed. So we'll talk a little bit more about those in another slide.
So we're going to go into what to watch out for. And what I want you to think about is these symptoms or these reactions that you saw on the previous slide. Think of them as droplets of water. Whenever we have a crisis, we're going to have natural responses to that crisis. And imagine each of those responses as a little drop of water dropping into a container of some sort. So once you start to have more and more of either the same reaction or symptom, either repeatedly or having like a compounding of different types of reactions and different symptoms, then that bucket or that container is going to fill and fill and overflow, eventually becoming so much water that it turns into a creek, and then it turns into a river, and then it turns into a lake, and then it turns into an ocean. And if we think about navigating those bodies of water, we think about how difficult it is to then go from managing a small cup of water to then managing an ocean of water, right? Feeling overwhelmed and inundated with so many symptoms and reactions. So, um, when you think of your own reactions to this crisis, the things that you want to definitely watch out for are the intensity of those reactions. So if they're very, very, very strong to the point that it's unbearable, that's when we would recommend seeking formal support. Then also, if you notice the duration, which is here, how long these things are happening, um, right now, we're in the midst of the crisis. We're in the midst of COVID-19 and managing it, at least here in the United States. And so, if you think about in the future, 6 months from now, 8 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, if your symptoms are still ongoing and your symptoms or your reactions are building on top of each other so much that they are lasting a very long time, then that's what you want to also look out for. So think of each of those droplets of water if you're starting to drown in your symptoms and reactions, or they're becoming harder to manage. Those are the things that you want to definitely seek formal support for. So, what do I mean by formal support? Formal support is seeking a therapist, the help of a therapist, seeking the help of a counselor, seeking the help of a psychologist or a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is somebody who can help you manage symptoms by prescribing medication. And even if you want to, you could potentially reach out to your own, like PCP, your primary care physician. And usually they'll refer you out to somebody who can help you in a more comprehensive way or in a more full and complete way.
So these are the kind of issues that we're going through when we talk about an event. So it's during and after an event. So one of them is the anxiety. It's a distress, uneasiness of mind. We notice that while we're having this anxiety, we're unable to think clearly. We have a lot of thoughts going through our head. Um, depression. We've all kind of seen that from other people, from even TV. The persistent feeling of sadness, a loss of interest. People don't want to feel unmotivated to get out of bed, and feel unmotivated to actually take a shower, to talk to other people. They isolate. A lot of things are happening when we have depression. So this is good to understand because it's good to see it within us. It's also good to see it with our family members. When we see people going through these situations, it's good to recognize it. So acute stress, it's uh, it can go from mild. So stress can be acute. It means that it's happening at the moment, and it's not something that's happening in months. But mild is, for example, the alarm going off, the deadlines, missing a phone call. But severe is more of the arguments. So this is something that could actually be going on at home. Um, when we have arguments with others, when we feel overwhelmed by the news. So this can actually we can actually feel it in our body, our chest. We know that we feel it in our shoulders. All these stress related symptoms. Um, we understand also that it doesn't matter if it's real or not, the threat is going to trigger it. So for if we go on social media, for example, and we're thinking like, wow, I noticed that
I'm I'm feeling like it's gonna hit my home, or this is happening elsewhere. It doesn't matter if it's real or imagined. Um, and we're gonna feel stressed. Um, when we're talking about acute stress, that's when we talk about, for example, breathing, distracting ourselves, meditation, relaxation, hypnotherapy. A lot of other things can actually help us reduce acute stress um, in a moment. But if we leave it untreated, it can actually become chronic. And this is where we're feeling it even months from now, and we just feel stressed or on it just from pain. And then we have the adjustment disorder, which is basically a group of those symptoms while we're going through a stressful life event or a reaction that's even stronger than expected. So I may feel stressed, but because of what's happening at the moment, or a situation that I'm having at home, or in my at my job, that's an adjustment disorder. Um, PTSD, we've heard of that, and I think that's a term that's many people use, um, where they're not using it correctly. But it's basically when we feel that a situation is life threatening, or somebody close to us has gone through the same situation that's life threatening. And because of that, now we have nightmares. Now we feel on the edge. Now we feel hopeless. We may feel angry, jumpy. We have flashbacks, and we can have some of those or all of those. And we withdraw ourselves from others. We mistrust other people. So this can happen with the PTSD. When we're talking about secondary PTSD, is when we actually are around somebody that has PTSD, and we're exposed to that person, and we have those symptoms as well. Even though we didn't go through a life-threatening experience ourselves, now we're unable to sleep. Now we feel on the edge or angry. So those are the situations that can happen because of an event such as the COVID-19.
So now that we're done talking about kind of all the Debbie Downer stuff, there's also hope at the end of all this. And something that is really important to understand about ourselves and as a group of people worldwide experiencing this, and especially in our own El Paso community, is that we're resilient people. And what does resilient mean? Resilient means the ability to bounce back from adversity. So being able to function and do well despite traumatic events or despite the hardships that we're going through. So here in with specifically, we want to talk about some work that's been done by Campa, who is a local researcher who does research on resilience. And what she talks about is connecting with your power self. So to be able to bounce back from adversity and to function well despite all these things that are going on, being able to connect with yourself as a person who understands that they are able to be hopeful and get through things, and understanding that you're going to be okay. Then another part of resilience is being able to problem solve. So, engaging that front brain and understanding, and that green part of the brain that we talked about earlier, being able to solve problems, being able to focus on what's important and reprioritizing certain things. Also, creating purpose and meaning for yourself. So, understanding that this situation might mean something for you later. And people who have really high levels of resiliency, despite adversity, have a really strong sense of purpose. So, this might look like volunteering or reaching out to a neighbor or a friend and doing those types of things that reinforce your purpose in life. Also, going along with that is community uplifting. So, as you become stronger, lifting up people from where they are to join you, and it becomes this ladder of upliftingness where we all uplift each other. That's an important part of resiliency. Understanding that we don't go through this alone, and there really is a sense of community when there is resilience, and also continuing to dream and not getting hope, letting hopelessness get the best of you. So even though things might seem dark and dreary sometimes, being able to have hope for the future, understanding, for example, that maybe a trip or a quinceañera or a wedding was postponed, but then understanding that that might occur later, or that reunion with your family will occur later, but it'll look differently now. And so continuing to have high hopes and dreams is an important part of being a resilient person.
So, what are some of those things that we can do daily to actually be able to feel better about ourselves? What are those things that will help us cope through this crisis? So, one of them is getting some sunlight. It's true, we cannot go to the park because in the park there wasn't that social distancing. We cannot go to enclosed spaces because we we could get sick, but we can still go outside as long as we have that social distancing from other people. Doesn't mean that we're gonna have reunions or anything, but we can actually go and we can walk, or we can just sit outside our in our yard or somewhere where we can actually get that sunlight. It's really important because it actually provides us vitamin D, which is going to help many of the other things that we're going to talk about, just sleeping better and feeling better. Eating well is necessary. It's There's a lot of connection between our gut and our emotions. So if we're able to eat well, we're going to feel better. If we're able to sleep well, we're going to have less anxiety, less thoughts popping up during the day. Moving regularly, taking a walk. There are a lot of videos out there on YouTube where they're actually helping us exercise. Many of the gyms are actually having live events where they're helping people exercise. So it's important to do as much as you can. Many people say that they have pain, and so we can actually sit in the chair and we can do exercises in the chair, whatever we need to do. Reducing social media exposure is important because there are a lot of rumors out there. There are a lot of news going on, and just noticing everything that's going on all the time is going to create that anxiety within us. So when we're able to shut that off, we're actually just able to breathe better. And so it's important to also limit that news time. If I'm going to watch the news, maybe I can watch 10 minutes in the morning or later on during the day, and just that, actually scheduling it, and not before I go to sleep. That's really important. So just being able to feel better, because now I don't have all the information coming in. The news don't really change all the time, not every minute. So it's okay to actually limit that news.
So then some of the internal habits.
So some of them are to be able to practice gratitude. I think that you had a good point, Crystal, when we were talking about, for example, when you went through drive-through, you actually thank the person for what they were doing. So this is actually important. There is a lot of connection between gratitude and feeling better. There are a lot of studies out there where people just wrote At night, they were able to write 3 things that they were grateful for, and this actually helped them feel better in the long run. And so if it's just a habit, thank the people around you. Hey, thank you for making the food. Thank you for picking that up. If I'm working, thank you for being silent while I work, or being you know, mindful of my space, everything. It's good to do that. Reflection time. What's going on inside me? What's going on in my mind? What's going on in my head? Which kind of works with the journaling. Journaling is actually a good reflection time where I can actually sit and I can say, like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is what's going on within me right now. Um, we talk about meditation and prayer. This is really important because it can create, first of all, prayer is a connection. It's a spiritual connection that actually creates hope as well. So both, and it depends on how you see it, but we can actually have a good energy because of the meditation and the prayer that we do, and we can ask for what we really need at that moment. Um, just having creative and expressive hobbies, drawing, maybe learning how to play an instrument or playing an instrument, singing. We can play music in our house and just feel better while we're, washing dishes or just sitting around, just walking. It's important to have those hobbies as well, where we create new things, and we don't go with the situation of despair that we might be feeling at the moment. It's more of, let me create something good and something new. We can also work with self compassion, understanding that if I'm feeling whatever feeling I'm getting, whatever emotion I'm getting, it's okay. That if at any moment I didn't react how I should have reacted, just be kind to ourselves, not expect a lot of perfection. Just being hugging ourselves, being nurturing ourselves, just like a mother would to a child. That's important. And of course, we have deep breathing, which is something that when we get more oxygen within our body, we can actually feel better, feel more at ease. It actually works very well to have that. So yes.
So, some recommendations as far as relationships or the relationship with others or your environment um, are as follows. So, trying to continue your work and school routine, but also understanding, remember what we talked about regarding the brain during a crisis. So, being able to still function and being able to keep some level of normalcy is good, but then also having compassion and patience because we are in the middle of a crisis. So, your expectations for other people and your expectations and standards for yourself should also be flexible at this time. Um, Boundaries as far as roles. I know a lot of people out there are parents, but they're also employees and they're also the at home school counselor now, and they're the at home nurse, and they're the at home cook and chef and everything. And so it's really important to understand that yes, your roles have probably increased because of the stay at home order, but understanding that you can set boundaries with yourself and with others regarding those things. So, for example, creating a schedule, announcing that schedule somehow by either like posting it on the fridge or having signs on the door. Like if you're busy and working, being able to let others in the household know that you're busy and that your time and space need to be respected at that time. Also, something I think that is a really strong temptation is to, when you're working from home, work in the bed or in the bedroom. And what your brain is going to start doing if you do that is it's going to start associating the bed with waking up instead of the bed being associated with sleep. So, if you can create those physical boundaries in your home so that you're able to still function the way you're supposed to when you're supposed to. So when you go to bed, you'll fall asleep and not wake up your brain and give it the signal that it's time to work. So that's an example of setting like um, a space type of boundary, setting up your environment to make sure that it's a healthy one. Setting up little workstations for your kids as well. That's going to be really important. And also making sure that just because you're working from home doesn't mean that you're available 24/7. So making sure that you turn off your email notifications at a reasonable time, just like you would at the office. You would leave your email alone at 5 p.m., then leave it alone at 5 p.m. Resist the temptation to check it. And the same goes with students as well. Um, then also you can attend events and stay connected. One example is going to like church online, joining different chat groups, joining webinars just like this one, where you can have some sort of human interaction and acknowledgement that you exist and that you're out there. Also scheduling bonding time. So I know that because a lot of parents and a lot of adults right now have a lot of different roles, you might be incredibly busy. So it's important to understand that your kids and the other people around you that live with you still need that connection. And so sometimes it might be useful to spend time together, either playing a board game or going through old family photos or watching funny videos together, things like that. Um, Obviously, the obvious one is connecting with loved ones and friends online. So having like parties through FaceTime or watch parties on Facebook or getting on Instagram and chatting with people, going live with other people, using Teams, using other types of online apps that can connect you to other people around the world. And kind of like Memo was saying earlier, reducing conversations and news for yourself, but also for minors. And why do we say that specifically for kids? Well, when we talked about the brain earlier, remember that their brains, kids' brains, are still developing. And yes, kids can be resilient, but they don't have um, the life experience and the sometimes the capabilities to what we call regulate. Regulate is being able to find a stable sense of emotion without being too scared or too stressed and without being too low or depressed. And so regulation is developing in kids and teenagers. So when they see images in the news or on social media about what's happening in the pandemic, it's going to affect their brains and their capacity to cope way differently than it's going to affect our capacities to cope as an adult. And the other thing I want to add here that's not at the bottom is that if you already have been diagnosed with some sort of anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, mood disorder, then you probably are likely going to be a little bit more sensitive to this information that's being circulated across the news. So it's really important not only for the general population who hasn't been diagnosed with any type of mental disorder, but especially for those who are undergoing current mental health treatment and diagnoses, because it's going to affect the way you cope and maybe make your symptoms worse, or bring back symptoms that weren't present for a long time. So it's really important to take these recommendations to take care of yourself and set those boundaries for yourself and for your loved ones.
And so, what are some of the things, the antidotes that are going to help us out during during this event to actually be able to also feel better and not fall into a more negative side. So one of them is flexibility. To understand that, and we were talking about schedules before, maybe being more on the work schedule, that things happen. and the kids are going to be around, and we're going to have to move our schedule. Other things are going to happen during our day that are unexpected, and so that's okay. And so practicing that flexibility within us.
And also being patient with each other, understanding that we're in the middle of a crisis. And so maybe not being so quick to judge or not being so demanding of people around us. One example could be when you're at the drive through getting your food, if you have to wait in line for a really long time, maybe understanding that the people who are serving us are taking extra precautions, are scared themselves because they have to be going to work. And so not expecting extremely, extremely fast service because we're all adjusting to this crisis. So patience can really go a long way.
Yes, most definitely, and also gratitude, as we were talking about before, um, and the gratitude of the people that are in our everyday life, gratitude of having our needs met, gratitude of being able to go outside and feel the sunlight. Just practicing that gratitude actually helps us.
Yes. And then also going along with those first three is respect. So just understanding that we're all adapting and not losing respect for each other, understanding that even with our kids, we should be respectful with them as well. Respecting each other's space, respecting each other's boundaries, respecting each other, even if we're having symptoms of depression or anxiety, understanding that that's okay and respecting that for people is going to be really important. And I think the a more fitting word would also be like understanding. Um, so respecting people for where they're at and how they're processing this crisis, but also understanding that, you know what, this makes sense why they're reacting that way.
Yes, most definitely, and also understanding this is temporary. And whatever we do now that affects another person, it's gonna have its consequences after it's over. So it's important to understand that and be compassionate. Be compassionate. It goes back to the others because when we have that compassion for others that are going through a situation, just understanding where they're coming from. Everybody lives a whole different situation. We can have the same event, and many people will have different feelings from it or will see it in a different way. So just understanding that that person and just being compassionate to it, and also self-compassion.
Yes, self compassion, having that compassion and understanding for yourself, that your brain is reacting a certain way right now, that things look differently than they did, and that, yes, things are changing, and that, yes, it's temporary, but right now, being understanding with yourself that your expectations and the way you're going to perform is going to look differently. And lastly, I think it's important to have hope that this is temporary. We may not go back to the way things used to be because it might look different. For example, we might not be able to shake hands anymore with people that we greet. Um, or might not be able to go to really full stores or concerts like we used to, but having hope that we're going to get through this and that there are people working 24/7 for our well-being, like doctors and nurses and researchers who are trying to find a cure and treatments and vaccines. And so, really focusing on all those positive things is really important. Looking at the people who are volunteering, the people who are working at the drive through and at the grocery store. I personally feel like they give me hope because it's like they're still working through all this adversity and look at how resilient they really are and showing the good side of humanity. So it's really important to focus on the positive stuff as well and keep your perspective balanced. Yes, all this bad stuff is happening on this one hand, but there's also good stuff happening too.
Yeah, exactly. And also, we're going to that gratitude as you mentioned. Also the people that are picking our food, our fruits, that the people that are packing our meats, everybody that's working together now, just so we can get through this. um, and just being able to say, all right, I'm staying at home and I can make a change just by staying at home. I can make a change just by staying away from other people, not because I have it or they have it, but because there's a risk. And just, what can I do right now? That's all that I can do. I can have my loved ones. I can be there. I can be there for my friends, for my family, and that's as much as I need to do. And that creates actually heroes out of us.
Yes. And so I just want to really quick before we start wrapping up the presentation, let everybody know that you're able to submit questions, and we're going to have a very short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So if you're able to look on your app or on your computer for a little bar that says chat or questions, you can submit your questions and our moderator, Jasmine, will read them to us and we can answer them as they come in. So if you have any questions about any of the material that we've covered, or if you have any questions right now about what we're saying, please let us know that you're here and that you have a question, and we'll try our best to answer it. And if we don't have an answer, then we can get back to you and do our research and give you an answer maybe later on. So please submit your questions. And then going back really quick to your last point about hope and doing your part to stay home, I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that right now, staying home is not something that people should take personally, right? Like, I'm not going to visit my parents or my grandparents because it's not because I don't like them or suddenly we had this like rupture in our relationship. It just means that I'm trying to care for them by staying home and not exposing them to something that could be potentially fatal. So, yes, you are being somewhat heroic when you stay home. So, even finding purpose in that, I think, as simply as that sounds, or as simple as that sounds, that act is really actually pretty heroic.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone for both of you and Crystal and Guillermo. We do have some questions. So we have a question regarding if this recording will be made available later.
We think so. We'll try our best. We're recording, and hopefully, they record with not just the audio but the video, and we will have it available for you. Yes.
And then we also have another question. We got some positive feedback regarding the presentation, and they're wondering if they can have a copy of the presentation afterwards.
Yes, we'll have a copy for you if you'd like. Just send us an email, and actually, you can send an email to counselors at counselingofelpaso.com. So it's counselors at counselingofelpaso.com, and we'll go ahead and email you that information.
And that's it for the questions. I think in the beginning, people were wondering if they could hear us or not, but I think that was able to get addressed at the beginning of the presentation. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and forward the next part here. Sorry.
Oh, yes. So this part is important. So we gave you a bunch of information about like trauma and crisis and what to watch out for and what to do next if you're experiencing any symptoms or reactions. Or you need some extra support. These are some resources that are available to you. The first one is the National Hotline, Suicide Hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text um, the National Suicide Hotline or a helpline, which is sending, I think, the word home to 741-741, and that's the text line. Then there's also Emergence Health Network, which is our local mental health authority here in El Paso, Texas, and in the region. And they have a crisis line that you can call, which is 779-1800, and they're open 24/7. Then there's also mental health hospital over on the west side of El Paso, and it's called Rio Vista Behavioral Health, and their phone number is 503-1959. And this is a place that you can reach out to if there's like a mental health crisis, if you're feeling like you want to hurt yourself, somebody else, and there's a mental health crisis, and you can contact them, as well as the 779 number at the top. And then Counseling of El Paso is the organization that hosted this webinar, and you can reach us at 915-209-1234 or www.counselingofelpaso.com. And you can look at our website there to get into contact with us if you like to get some therapy services over telehealth.
And one more thing that I understand that some people might not be from El Paso because there's, of course, the webinar is going nationally, maybe even internationally. But if you have questions on how to find a therapist in your town or how to find help in your town, shoot us an email and we'll gladly help you out with that. So it's either counselors@counselingofelpaso.com or even info@counselingofelpaso.com, and we'll definitely help you through this. Thank you very much for coming to a webinar. Thank you very much for giving us your time. There are some references again. If you want those references, if you want the presentation, just email us and we'll gladly give you a presentation, those resources.
Again, thank you so much. We do appreciate all of everything you've done, and we appreciate also the support and the expertise that you are providing to the community. We did get additional feedback in the questions portion saying that they're thanking you for the presentation and commending you on a great job. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Guillermo.
Thank you.